Officer Monique Bradshaw had only one rule when it came to duty: never let fear take the wheel. She'd faced mortar fire in faraway deserts, crawled through snake-infested jungles on covert ops, and stared down men who believed her life mattered less because of the color of her skin. None of that broke her. But she'd soon learn that nothing compares to the quiet terror lurking in a small American town under the iron fist of a corrupt system. Because while she might have come back from war, the greatest battle of her life was about to begin right on her home soil, and this time, the enemy wore badges. She'd only been in Granton County, Georgia for a month, long enough to see a cop shake down a mechanic for protection fees, watch a local newscast spin black victims into criminals, and hear folks whisper that nobody defied Sheriff Nolan Rhodes if they wanted to live to see morning. Monique believed in justice. She donned the uniform of the U.S. Army, served her country with unwavering loyalty, but something about Granton stank of rot that went far beyond petty bribes, and that stench led her straight into a pit of corruption, lies, and racial hatred, so deep that it would consume the entire county. But before we get into how this black female veteran became public enemy number one in a place she'd hoped to call home, let me ask, where are you reading from tonight? And if you believe in standing up against tyranny, make sure you stick around. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about what happens when good people decide enough is enough. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Monique arrived in Granton with little fanfare. She wore her hair cropped close, a few silver strands showing at her temples, a consequence of stress and years of special ops duty. In civvies, she looked unassuming. Jeans, a gray t-shirt, battered army boots that'd seen more sand than these rural roads would ever know. She'd come with the hope of starting a new chapter after medical retirement from the Army. People sometimes asked how a bullet to the shoulder could force a discharge, but the truth was more complicated. She'd taken shrapnel near her spine in the same blast, leaving nerve damage that flared unpredictably. Pain would shoot from her neck to her fingers, sometimes knocking her flat. She wanted a quiet place to recover, reconnect with family. Her Aunt Teresa lived in a weathered trailer near the county line, a woman who sang gospel on Sundays and baked pecan pies for the kids who ventured too close to her yard. "Monique," Aunt Teresa had said over the phone months before, "why don't you come stay a while? Lord knows we need more folks who can keep the peace around here." Aunt Teresa had laughed, a warm sound that reminded Monique of simpler times. Just don't go thinking your uniform means anything to these local cops. They run the show in a way Uncle Sam never did. Monique soon found out that was the understatement of the century. In her first week, she watched two deputies, both scrawny, both wearing smug grins, knock on an elderly neighbor's door demanding extra fees for checking the property line. The neighbor was a black man in his 70s who'd once marched for civil rights. He flinched like someone who'd been struck too many times. Monique approached them, cool and polite, offering to see what the problem was. The deputies just sneered. One said, "Lady, best you mind your own." They left with a wad of wrinkled bills, the old man's hands shaking on his cane. "It's how it goes," he told her afterward with hollow eyes. "We pay if we want to keep breathing, or else they find a reason to lock us up." A creeping anger built in Monique that day. She'd served in war zones where warlords extorted villages, and now she saw the same intimidation wearing official badges right here in America. She made a mental note to keep an eye on those deputies. Her instincts said there was more than just small-time corruption at play. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, Aunt Teresa's next-door neighbor, a single mother named Liz, vanished after refusing to pay a fine for loitering outside her own trailer. The kids she left behind cried on her porch. When Monique asked around, she got shrugs or anxious silence. Locals avoided her gaze, as if speaking the truth would bring the devil himself to their doorstep. She marched into the sheriff's station, politely requesting to speak with someone about a missing person. A short, red-faced clerk behind the counter stared at her uniform jacket, she sometimes still wore it out of habit, and barked, "You ex-army or something?" Monique gave a curt nod. "Retired. But that's not relevant. I'm here about a missing woman." "Lady, we get lots of missing folks. The clerk answered, bored. You from the FBI? CIA? He clearly didn't want to help. No, I'm just a concerned neighbor. That's your mistake, soldier girl. Concerned neighbors get themselves into trouble. He pointed to a row of seats. Take a seat or go home. We'll let you know if we find her. Monique's jaw clenched. She'd dealt with arrogance before, but the brazen, condescending tone told her there was a deeper game. She refused to budge, planting herself on the creaky vinyl chair. She stayed for 2 hours until an older deputy with salt and pepper hair came over, wearing a faux sympathetic smile. Ma'am, we have no record of a missing Liz. Perhaps she took off with a boyfriend. You know how it is with these folks, always chasing something. He gave a half laugh, like he'd told an inside joke. Monique wanted to snap, to list off her years of commendations, her rank, to demand they respect the Constitution they'd sworn to uphold. But a calmer, more strategic part of her mind suggested a different approach. Gather evidence first, identify allies, strike when the time was right. She merely nodded, rose from the chair, and left. The deputy's smirk lingered in her mind. She made a vow. She wasn't leaving Granton until she figured out exactly what was happening. At Aunt Teresa's house that evening, the older woman clicked her tongue. Baby girl, Teresa sighed. You're poking a hornet's nest. Folks around here, they do as they're told. That's how you stay alive. Monique folded her arms, the memory of Afghanistan's dusty roads floating through her head. I didn't risk my life overseas to bow down to bullies at home, she said quietly. If that's how it is, then so be it. Teresa's eyes brimmed with motherly concern. All right, she said. But you best be careful. Sheriff Rhodes isn't just any sheriff. He's got connections. Political, financial. Word is a senator from the next county helps fund his re-election. They keep each other happy. People here talk about hush money, about bodies that wash up in the river with no official explanation. Just be smart, child. Monique nodded. She'd gone through Army Ranger training, served in special ops, taken part in high-stakes missions. She wasn't naive about the dangers of an entrenched power structure. The difference was, in the Army, you at least had a chain of command that, in theory, valued discipline and honor. Here, it seemed like the chain of command was the problem. The next morning, she began her quiet reconnaissance. She started with something basic, the local diner. People gossiped over coffee, and waitresses overheard everything. Monique sat at the back booth, nibbling on toast. She eavesdropped on 2 men in flannel, their conversation dripping with a mix of fear and resentment. Calhoun said the sheriff's men took Manny last night, one man muttered. Said Manny owed him extra for protection. Manny refused. Now Manny's in a holding cell on some made-up charge. Same old, the other man replied with a sigh. You either pay up or find yourself locked up. If Manny tries to fight, he'll vanish like Liz did. Monique's heart hammered. There it was again. The pattern of arrests, vanishings. The county didn't even bother to hide it. She finished her coffee, left a tip, and walked out, glaring up at the pale sun creeping through the haze. She spent the next few days talking to folks in the more run-down parts of town. She saw bruises on arms, vacant stares and eyes too tired to hope. They'd ask her, "What can you do about it?" Or, "You think you can fix this?" Some laughed bitterly. Others turned away. She met a teenage boy whose father had disappeared after speaking out about police brutality. His voice shook as he told her, "Now it's just me and my brother, ma'am. We keep our heads down. We have no choice." She was building a picture, an ugly, monstrous picture of a county where the law was little more than a gang's tool. The names that kept popping up were the same. Sheriff Nolan Rhodes and his right-hand man, Sergeant Dave Remington, a beady-eyed deputy rumored to enjoy persuading people with his fists. Monique kept quiet, but her posture grew tenser, her eyes sharper. She'd begun a routine of physical therapy exercises at dawn to manage her nerve pain, quietly cursing under her breath whenever her left arm went numb. She didn't want to rely on heavy painkillers. Kept her mind too foggy. She needed clarity, and clarity came with discipline, with having a plan. That plan began to form the morning she discovered Manny, newly released on bail, limping down a side street. She recognized him from the diner gossip, a black man in his 30s. Manny had fresh bruises across his jaw, a sling on his left arm. The look in his eyes was defeat, and behind that, a flicker of anger. Monique approached gently, introduced herself. He eyed her suspiciously until she mentioned she was ex-military and looking to help. "You can't help, lady," Manny said, voice flat. "They own the judges, the station, the money. All I got is a battered body and a worthless job at the auto shop. I speak out, they drag me in, say I resisted. They plant evidence. They threaten my wife, said they'd lock her up for possession if we didn't pay a fee. She's gone now. Took our daughter and fled to her sister's place. I'm alone, and if you're not careful, you will be too." His words struck a chord. Monique had no spouse or kids, but she knew what it was like to lose a sense of safety. Her time in the army had taught her that sometimes you stand firm, not because you expect to win, but because running is no longer an option. She told Manny about Liz and how she was investigating. Manny shook his head. "I heard rumors she's in a secret holding area behind the station," he said, glancing over his shoulder like someone might be listening. "They don't process some folks through official channels. They keep them stashed away, maybe hand them over to, well, who knows? Some folks say criminals run the show behind the scenes, dealing in drugs and trafficking. The sheriff's in on it. They have ways to make people disappear. Some rumors about mass graves near the old bog. But who's gonna check?" Monique's jaw tightened. "I will," she said. Manny's brows furrowed. "Lady, they'll kill you." She shrugged. "They can try." That night she slipped from Aunt Teresa's trailer, told her aunt she was visiting a friend out of town. She wore dark clothes, kept her hair tucked under a cap, and carried an old Glock she'd purchased legally years ago as an off-duty weapon. She was no vigilante, killing wasn't her goal, but she wasn't about to confront armed thugs empty-handed. She parked her battered old sedan a block away from the station, the cool night air carrying a tang of pine and barbecue smoke. For half an hour she watched the building. 2 squad cars in the front, a battered SUV on the side. She spotted a single uniformed deputy leaning against the doorway, smoking. He looked bored. She slipped around back, noticing a fenced yard with a padlocked gate. Lights flickered overhead. She crouched by the fence, quietly testing the chain. Locked tight, she scanned the perimeter. A small service entrance lay behind a row of trash bins. It had a digital keypad. Monique exhaled, eyes narrowing. She didn't have the code. Suddenly, the back door swung open. A short, pot-bellied deputy exited, dragging 2 heavy black trash bags. He tossed them into a dumpster, cursing under his breath, then walked back inside without noticing her. But the door stayed open a crack. Monique seized the moment, sliding in before it closed. Her heart pounded. She found herself in a dimly lit hallway that reeked of disinfectant and stale coffee. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead. She pressed against the wall, creeping forward. She overheard a conversation in a small break room. The pot-bellied deputy was complaining to a man with a deep, gravelly voice. She recognized the second voice from around town, Sergeant Dave Remington. "We gotta clean up that holding area," the pot-bellied man said. "That new batch came in, and they're screaming like stuck pigs. Rhodes wants them quiet." "You think I don't know that?" Remington snarled. "We'll get them shipped out tomorrow. Word is that big buyer from a few counties over is coming at dawn, wants fresh stock. Heard one of these is some pregnant chick. She might fetch extra cash." Monique's blood turned to ice. Human trafficking. She'd suspected something vile, but hearing it spelled out made her want to charge in, guns blazing. She forced herself to breathe slowly. She needed proof, needed to save them if she could. She had to be methodical. The men parted ways. She waited, counting down the seconds. Then she followed Remington at a distance, every sense on high alert. He led her to a locked door at the end of the hallway. She pressed herself into a dark alcove while he punched in a code. She memorized the beat pattern, her army training in infiltration flooding back. Remington disappeared inside. 10 seconds later, the door hissed shut. She needed a distraction to slip in. She retreated to the break room. An idea struck. The coffee maker sat on the counter, half full. She rummaged in the cabinets, found a small bottle of flammable cleaner. Never corner a soldier with time to scheme, she muttered to herself, pouring the chemical into the coffee maker's reservoir. She turned on the heating plate, waited until she smelled the acrid stench. Then she tugged a bag of chips from a vending machine, stuffed the plastic in the maker's filter area, letting it smolder. Within minutes, smoke curled upward. An alarm squealed. Deputies rushed out from various rooms, cursing and shouting. Perfect. While they scrambled to contain the mini fire in the break room, Monique hurried to the locked door, repeating the beat pattern Remington had punched in. On the second try, the lock clicked. She entered a narrow corridor lit by flickering fluorescence. The walls were cinder blocks painted a sickly pale gray. Her nose wrinkled at the smell of urine, sweat, and despair. She peered through barred windows along the corridor, glimpsing small cells. Inside them, men, women, even a child, crouched in the gloom, fear etched in their faces. She felt a surge of anger so potent it almost weakened her knees. She forced it down, scanning for cameras. She spotted one at the far end, pointing away. She moved quickly. In one cell, a woman with a tear-streaked face mumbled prayers. She looked up as Monique passed. The woman whispered, "Help us." Monique nodded, tried the handle. Locked. No key box in sight. She considered shooting the lock, but that'd draw attention. She didn't see Liz, but she recognized Manny's description of the secret holding area. She pressed on, each cell a testimony to cruelty. Some individuals lay unconscious, or too broken to speak. Near the end of the row, she found Liz, collapsed in a corner. Monique's breath caught. Liz's wrists were shackled, her clothes torn. She had bruises on her arms and an expression of numb despair. Monique rattled the bars softly, calling her name. Liz stirred, blinking in disbelief. "Stay calm," Monique whispered. "I'm getting you out." Footsteps echoed behind her. She spun, drawing her Glock. Sergeant Remington stood there, glaring, a baton in one hand, sidearm in the other. "Who the hell are you?" he hissed, though his eyes said he remembered her from the station that day. He eyed her black skin, her stance. "You're that ex-soldier, aren't you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she kept her weapon trained on him, finger hovering near the trigger. He grinned, stepping forward. "You have no idea what you're messing with, lady. The sheriff's got powerful friends. You shoot me, you sign your own death warrant." Monique's heart hammered. She'd faced worse threats, but she also knew one bullet wouldn't end the entire corruption. Remington lunged, swinging his baton. She sidestepped, slamming her pistol butt across his jaw. He stumbled, blood on his lip, but recovered faster than she expected. He elbowed her in the ribs. Pain flared from her old shrapnel wound, making her vision swim. She clenched her teeth, swept his legs out from under him with a fluid motion. He hit the floor, losing grip on his baton. Before he could rise, she pressed her boot to his throat, gun aimed at his head. His eyes bulged. She forced herself to remain calm. Killing him here might doom everyone in the cells if the station locked down. She drew in a shaky breath, stooped to grab his gun and flung it aside. She caught him across the temple with the butt of her pistol, knocking him out cold. He lay there, breathing shallowly. Alarms still blared from the coffee maker fiasco, covering some of the noise. She patted Remington's pockets, found a ring of keys. Perfect. She raced back to Liz's cell, unlocking the door. "Can you walk?" Monique asked, voice urgent. Liz winced, staggering as she tried to stand. I can try." Monique quickly unlocked the other cells, motioning for the captives to follow. Some were too weak to move. Others blinked as if they couldn't believe they were being freed. She felt a crushing weight. She couldn't save them all on her own. Not with half the station outside. "We'll come back," she whispered to the ones who didn't budge. "I promise." With Liz leaning on her shoulder, she guided 5 others, 3 men, 2 women, down the corridor. She prayed the chaos outside still raged. Pushing through the door into the station's main hall, they nearly collided with a deputy carrying a fire extinguisher. He froze, mouth agape, dropping the canister. Monique aimed her pistol. "Drop your weapon," she hissed. The deputy complied, eyes darting to the battered group behind her. "You're making a big mistake." "No," Monique growled. "I'm ending yours." She motioned for him to stand aside. Then she led the captives out the side entrance, hearts pounding. Sirens blared from the front. The smell of burnt plastic filled her nostrils. It was a gauntlet, but luck or providence was on her side. No one else barred their way. They spilled into the back lot, stumbling toward the fence. Another locked gate. She hammered at the chain with her pistol butt, but it wouldn't break. One of the men, a wiry mechanic with trembling hands, used a metal rod he'd found in the hallway to pry the chain. After a minute of desperate effort, it snapped. They fled into the night. A few parted ways almost immediately, terrified and eager to hide. Monique held on to Liz, who shivered. "I can't go home," Liz murmured. "They'll find me." Monique swallowed. "We'll figure something out." She guided Liz to her sedan parked around the corner. She bundled the injured woman into the passenger seat, covering her with a blanket. Rage and adrenaline coursed through Monique's veins, swirling with guilt. She'd freed a handful of prisoners, but how many more were still trapped? And now the sheriff would double down. Of that she was certain. She drove to an abandoned cabin she'd scouted earlier while exploring the outskirts, a place near the old sawmill, half hidden by pines. There, she helped Liz inside, lighting a dusty oil lamp. Monique's chest burned from the scuffle. She wanted to check for broken ribs, but Liz needed attention first. Bruises, dehydration, possibly a concussion. There was no easy way to get her to a hospital. They'd ask questions, the sheriff would find them. So Monique cleaned the cuts with bottled water, gave Liz aspirin from her med kit, tried to reassure her. Liz clung to her hand. They took the others away sometimes, she whispered, tears cutting lines in her grime-covered cheeks. Said they were selling them to someone. I heard them talk about money. They tried to threaten me too. They said if my family didn't pay up, I'd be shipped. She sobbed. I have a son. I need to get back to him. They threatened him. Monique rubbed Liz's shoulder, voice soft. We'll get you and your boy out of this, I promise. She spent a sleepless night, her mind a battlefield of guilt, anger, and strategy. The next day, news exploded across local television. Mass break-in at the sheriff's station, the anchor said sternly. Suspects freed, including multiple violent offenders. The public is warned to be on high alert. Sheriff Rhodes promises swift justice. They played grainy security footage of a figure that might be Monique, though it was too dark to see her face. The anchor hammered the narrative that these criminals posed a threat to the community. Monique watched it from the cabin, teeth clenched. They're going to spin this so I'm the villain? She muttered to Liz. Sure enough, within hours, black SUVs rolled across the county, uniformed men stepping out with K-9 units, brandishing rifles like they were heading into a war zone. The system had turned all its might inward, searching for the terrorist who dared free dangerous criminals. She recognized one of the figures from a distance, a tall, broad-shouldered deputy named Ellis. He was said to be Rhodes's nephew. She'd heard folks say Ellis was ex-military, dishonorably discharged. She frowned. She'd have to watch out for him. He'd know some of the same tactics she did. She also spotted new players, men in plain clothes, wearing earpieces, scanning the area with advanced equipment. Federal, or maybe private mercenaries. Her gut twisted. Rhodes must have deep pockets to hire that kind of muscle so quickly. Liz insisted on leaving the next evening. She was desperate to reach her son, who was under the care of a neighbor. Monique found an old pickup behind the cabin, hot-wired it with her limited knowledge, and handed Liz some cash. Drive as far as you can, she said, hugging her. Find a safe place. Don't come back here. Liz wept quietly but nodded. Thank you, she murmured. You saved my life. Then she was gone, leaving Monique in the swirling dust, alone in a war that had just begun. The situation escalated rapidly. People started disappearing in larger numbers. The news pinned every disappearance on Monique, calling her an armed radical. They showed pictures of random bullet casings, alleged drug stashes. "This ex-military extremist is causing chaos," one reporter declared. "If you see her, call 911 immediately. She is to be considered dangerous." At Aunt Teresa's trailer, Monique confronted her aunt late one night. "I have to expose them," she said, trembling with anger and fear. "Liz told me they're trafficking people. This is bigger than bribes. If I can just get evidence, photos, videos, something the outside world can't ignore, maybe we can bring in the FBI for real." Teresa hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "Honey, I don't want to lose you. This county doesn't take kindly to heroes." Monique embraced her aunt. "I know, but I can't walk away." Teresa nodded, pressed an envelope into Monique's hand. "This is some money I've saved. Go buy yourself something that'll help you get proof, a camera or a phone that can't be traced. I'll hold down the fort. If the cops come, I'll say I haven't seen you." Touched by her aunt's courage, Monique set out at midnight, slipping past roadblocks by using old logging roads she'd memorized. She reached a larger town about 30 miles away, one not under Rhodes's control, and purchased a high-quality camera with a zoom lens, plus extra memory cards. She also got a cheap flip phone under a fake name to reduce the chance of being traced. Returning was harrowing. She had to cross farmland patrolled by armed men. She took advantage of a heavy rainstorm that turned roads to mud, slipping past the watchful eyes of a deputy checkpoint. At dawn, she crouched in a barn outside Granton, soaking wet, exhausted. But she had the gear. Now, she needed the target. Over the next week, she surveilled the sheriff's station from various vantage points, roof lines, abandoned houses. She saw black vans pulling in at odd hours, unloading people in shackles, or sometimes loading them up. She captured grainy footage, but it wasn't enough. Her zoom lens had limited clarity in the darkness. She needed something more incriminating. She discovered that every Friday at midnight, a group of men in suits arrived, accompanied by Remington or Ellis that smelled like a payoff or an exchange. She resolved to record one of those exchanges up close. The day she planned to infiltrate the station again, the county sheriff's vehicles unleashed a wave of terror. They arrested random civilians, claiming they were aiding the extremist. People of color were especially targeted. Every black man Monique met seemed on the brink of panic, many trying to flee. Aunt Teresa called her, voice shaking, saying uniformed men had shown up at her door, demanding to know where Monique was. Teresa had faked ignorance. "They said they'd come back with a warrant." Teresa gasped. "Honey, it's not safe for me to stay here." Monique clenched her phone, fury in her veins. "Go to your sisters in the next county, Aunt Teresa. I'll contact you soon. I love you." Another piece of her stable life, gone. She felt more alone than ever. She couldn't back down. So that Friday, under the cover of a moonless sky, she found herself scaling the side of the station building. She'd located a ventilation shaft that led to the roof. With gloved hands, she hoisted herself up onto a narrow ledge. Adrenaline spiked. Her left arm screamed with nerve pain, but she forced it to obey. She tucked her camera in a side pouch, heart thrumming like a drum in her ears. On the roof, she crawled to an access hatch. Through its slats, she spied the large lot below. At 11:58, headlights appeared. 2 black SUVs rolling in. Men in suits stepped out, followed by Ellis. They opened the trunk of one SUV. Monique angled her camera through the slats, focusing the zoom. She pressed record, breath shallow. 4 people emerged, shackled. 3 women and a teenage boy. The suits inspected them like cattle, shining flashlights in their faces. Ellis handed over a thick envelope. She heard muffled exchanges about payment, about delivering them on schedule. One woman sobbed. The boy cowered. Monique's stomach churned. This was it. Hard evidence of trafficking. She nearly wept with relief as the camera captured everything. One of the suits slapped money into Ellis's hand. Another man barked, "Tell Rhodes the next batch better be healthier." Customers don't like damaged goods. Ellis just nodded. Then they shoved the captives into a van. Monique got every second on video. Proof. For a moment she felt triumph. Then a horrifying crash of pain exploded in her back. She gasped, body slamming forward against the vent. A deputy on the roof. She hadn't heard him approach. He just whacked her with a baton. She scrambled, rolling aside as he aimed a second blow. The camera fell from her pouch, clattering toward the edge of the roof. She made a desperate lunge for it, ignoring the searing in her spine. The deputy lunged too, but she spun, hooking his leg. He tumbled onto the hard surface, cursing. She seized the camera, hugging it to her chest as the man rose. "This ends now," he growled. "The sheriff's done playing games." He advanced. Monique was unarmed except for a small folding knife. She flicked it open. The deputy laughed. "You think you can fight me with that?" She let her training guide her. He swung the baton. She ducked, then slashed at his forearm. He hissed, stumbling back. Blood glistened under the rooftop floodlights. She lunged, aiming for his torso. He deflected with the baton, landing a blow on her injured shoulder. She cried out, knees buckling. The deputy grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "Shoulda stayed gone, soldier girl," he spat. With her last shred of strength, she jammed her elbow backward into his ribcage. He gasped. She twisted free, the camera bouncing painfully against her side, then pivoted and drove a kick into his groin. He dropped to his knees. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed his baton and smacked him in the temple. He slumped, unconscious or worse. She didn't care which. Below, the SUVs roared to life, driving off with the captives. She was too late to save them, but not too late to expose them. Hard hammering, she stuffed the baton in her belt, pocketed the camera, and limped to the far edge. A rope was her best chance. She coiled a length of leftover cable from a rooftop maintenance kit, secured it around a vent pipe, and rappelled down. Her wounded shoulder felt like fire. When her feet hit the ground, she was dizzy with pain. Suddenly, the station's rear door burst open. Ellis stepped out, scanning. She froze behind a parked cruiser, praying he wouldn't spot her. He didn't. He was too busy barking at subordinates. "Check the roof. I heard fighting. That damn soldier might be up there." Deputies sprinted around the side. Monique inhaled and made a break for the darkness, camera clutched tight. It was a miracle she reached her car, stashed a few blocks away, and drove off without pursuit. Once safe in the cabin again, she reviewed the footage. Despite her shaking hands, it was clear enough to show the entire transaction. Faces, shackles, money. Enough to bury Rhodes and Ellis if she could get it into the right hands. She tried emailing the video to national news outlets, but her phone refused to send large attachments. The internet connection was spotty out in the wilderness. She tried a local news station. No response. Fear clutched her. The station might be compromised. She needed help from outside Granton, from a journalist or official who wouldn't bury the truth. She rummaged in her contacts. An old army buddy of hers, Captain Rebecca Dunn, had left the service for the FBI. Could she be stationed near here? She dialed a secure line. No answer. It was 3 a.m. Maybe Rebecca was asleep. She left a cryptic message. "Becky, it's Monique. I have evidence of major crimes in Granton County. Human trafficking, police corruption. Lives are at stake. I'll try calling back in the morning. Please help me." She ended the call, praying Rebecca would come through. Early the next day, she moved from the cabin to an abandoned farm on the opposite side of town. She was sure the sheriff's men would comb the area soon. Desperation gnawed at her. Aunt Teresa was gone, Manny was in hiding, Liz had fled. She had no allies except maybe Manny if she could find him. She decided to try. Manny lived in a cramped rental near the auto shop. She crept to his door at dusk, tapping lightly. He answered with a start, eyes wide. "Monique?" he whispered. "You're insane coming here." "Can I come in?" she asked. He let her in, locking the door behind them. He looked thinner, exhausted. She explained she had video proof, but no way to get it out effectively. Manny nodded, rummaging in a closet. "I know a guy who was once a journalist in Atlanta. He lost his job, ended up here. He hates Rhodes. If we can meet him, he might have contacts who'll broadcast your footage. Monique felt a flicker of hope. Let's do it. They arranged a secret rendezvous in a rundown motel. Manny's journalist contact, a wiry white man named Travis, arrived, glancing over his shoulder as though expecting to be tailed. "All right," Travis said, voice shaking. "Let me see what you got." Monique played the clip. Travis cursed under his breath. "This is huge, damning. If we can get this to the right stations, Rhodes and his entire operation will burn." They discussed ways to smuggle the footage out. Travis had a laptop and a special VPN. They tried uploading the file. It stuck at 30%, then the connection dropped. Over and over, they retried. Manny paced. Monique clenched her fists. The county was notorious for poor internet, but she suspected sabotage. After an hour, they managed to send part of it. Travis typed messages to some trusted contacts. Suddenly, headlights flooded the motel parking lot. Panic shot through them. "How did they find us?" Manny hissed. Travis frantically shoved the laptop into a bag, muttering, "We still have most of the clip. Maybe it's enough." Through a gap in the curtains, Monique recognized the sheriff's SUV. They'd come in force, at least 4 vehicles. "We have to run," she whispered. But it was too late. Doors slammed, boots stomped. The muzzle of a shotgun cracked the motel door's flimsy lock. Deputies flooded in, guns raised. Monique dove behind the bed. Manny pressed himself against a wall. Travis cowered near the table. One deputy shouted, "Hands up, all of you! Move and you're dead!" Then Ellis strode in, face twisted with cold fury. He spotted Monique. "Oh, we've been looking for you," he sneered. "Sheriff's orders. Bring you in alive if possible, but a body bag's just as fine." His gaze flicked to Manny and Travis. "And your little accomplices, aiding a terrorist?" Monique's mind raced. She needed to protect that footage. The laptop bag was near Travis's feet. Ellis seemed too fixated on Monique to notice. She raised her hands slowly, stepping forward as if surrendering. "All right," she said in a level voice. "Don't shoot." He motioned for his men to cuff her. The moment one deputy drew near, she pivoted, swinging a powerful elbow into his jaw. He dropped. Another deputy fired a shot that splintered the dresser. Manny lunged, tackling the second deputy, both crashing into the TV stand. Travis grabbed the laptop bag, diving under a table to shield it from stray bullets. Ellis cursed, leveling his pistol at Monique. She snatched a lamp, hurling it. It shattered harmlessly, but the distraction let her duck behind the bed. She scrambled for the downed deputy's shotgun, cocking it just as Ellis fired a round that grazed her shoulder. Pain seared through old scars. She grit her teeth, pumping the shotgun. One blast thundered, forcing Ellis to dive sideways. Manny took the opportunity to slug the deputy he'd tackled, knocking him cold. Another deputy shrank back, radioing for backup. Travis crawled toward the bathroom, cradling his laptop bag. Ellis snarled, "Stay back," to his men, as if worried about more friendly fire. Then he locked eyes with Monique. "You don't stand a chance. This county belongs to us. You'll die here, or in a cell. Makes no difference." Monique's heart pounded. She racked the shotgun again. "I've seen real evil overseas," she spat, "and you're nothing but a cheap imitation." She fired toward Ellis, forcing him to roll behind a half-broken table. Manny, battered and bleeding from a cut on his head, gestured for Travis to move out the door, but more deputies had arrived outside, surrounding them. Sirens wailed. The entire motel seemed under siege. A bullet whipped past Monique's ear, lodging in the headboard. Another deputy tried flanking her from the side window, but Manny, in a sudden act of bravery, dashed across the room and pinned the deputy's arm, spoiling his aim. They struggled in a corner. She heard Travis yelling, "We're trapped." She had to decide, surrender or break out. Surrender meant Rhodes would crush them, and the footage might never see daylight. She had to get Travis out with that laptop. She scanned the grimy motel room, saw a small vent near the ceiling. Not an option. Too small. The front door and windows were covered. The bathroom had a flimsy back window. Maybe that was it. "Travis!" she shouted. Bathroom window, go! Travis, face pale, scuttled into the bathroom. She covered him, firing at the door. The deafening blasts kept the deputies at bay. Manny freed himself from the pinned deputy, grabbed a lamp and smashed it on the man's head. The guy slumped. Then Manny bolted into the bathroom too. Ellis realized the plan, roaring, "Don't let them escape, you idiots!" He fired repeatedly into the walls, chips of plaster raining down, but the bathroom door was closed, offering partial cover. Monique shoved it open behind her, following Manny. The small window was indeed big enough for a person to wriggle through if they turned sideways. "Travis first!" Manny shouted. Travis squeezed out, dropping the short distance to the alley below. Manny followed, wincing at the cut on his temple. Monique heard the door behind them burst open. She turned, shotgun raised. Ellis stood there, pistol aimed. They fired at the same time. Ellis's bullet whizzed past her ear. Her shotgun blast caught him in the shoulder. He staggered with a scream, dropping to a knee, but not before a second round from his pistol tore into her thigh. She cried out, leg giving way. She collapsed, seeing Manny vanish through the window. Ellis, blood seeping from his wound, crawled forward, fury contorting his face. "You piece of—" he snarled, raising his pistol. Monique tried to lift the shotgun again, but her hands trembled, slick with blood. The gun felt impossibly heavy. She'd never been shot in the leg before, and the agony was unlike anything she'd endured. She thought of the tortured souls in the station, thought of Liz, Manny, Aunt Teresa. She refused to let it end here. Summoning every ounce of will, she lunged forward, driving her shoulder into Ellis, knocking him off balance. His pistol cracked a shot, grazing the side of her ribs. White-hot pain stole her breath. She grabbed at his wrist, forcing it upward as the muzzle flashed. The bullet shattered the bathroom light fixture. Sparks flew. He headbutted her and she saw stars. "Why won't you just die?" he hissed, voice ragged. She managed to wedge her knee into his gut. "Because I promised to protect the innocent," she ground out. She tore the pistol from his grip, slamming its butt into his temple. He went limp. Panting, tears stinging her eyes, she crawled to the window. A deputy's voice shouted from the bedroom, "Sergeant, you okay?" She heard them stepping closer. No time. Biting down on a scream, she hauled herself up and out, tumbling to the pavement outside. Manny caught her arms, or she would have cracked her skull. They limped away, Travis leading, the laptop bag hugged to his chest like a sacred treasure. Sirens roared from every direction. The motel's neon sign flickered overhead, painting the alley in sickly pink. They found Manny's battered sedan in the next block. Travis helped Monique into the back seat. Manny took the driver's seat, wincing as he started the engine. "Hang on," he mumbled. They peeled out, bullets pinging the trunk as they sped into the night. Ahead, a blockade of cruisers loomed. Manny swerved onto a side street, tires squealing. More sirens closed in. It was a high-speed chase through narrow roads lined with dilapidated houses. Monique clutched her leg, trying to stanch the bleeding. She realized with horror that she might bleed out if they didn't get help soon. Travis, face pale, glanced back at her. "We can't outrun them forever. We need a miracle, or we need to hide." Manny nodded, breathing hard. "I know a place. Junkyard off Route 9. He turned, accelerating onto a dark highway. The cruisers followed, their red and blue lights strobing across the pines. In the distance, the sky glowed faintly, the promise of dawn a few hours away. The junkyard was a maze of rusted cars, twisted metal. Manny slammed through a chained gate, then killed the headlights. The pursuing cops did the same, but Manny zigzagged between heaps of scrap. The darkness swallowed them. The cruisers circled, beams of light sweeping across wrecked car shells. Dogs barked in the distance. Manny parked behind a towering pile of crushed vehicles. "Everybody out," he whispered. "We can't stay in the car." Monique clung to Manny's shoulder, gasping as her wounded leg brushed a broken seatbelt. Travis hovered anxiously. "We have to get her medical help," he whispered. Manny frowned. "There's a doc. Doc Latham, used to be a field medic. He's half crazy, but he patched me up once. Lives a mile from here." Monique nodded weakly. "Then let's go." They had to move carefully, weaving through rows of rusted truck carcasses. Flashlights probed the darkness on the other side of the yard. The dogs barked again, closer. They pressed their backs against cold metal, hearts thumping. Manny pointed to a small hole in the fence. They squeezed through. Monique stifled a cry as pain jolted her leg. She thought of the camera footage, the laptop. If this night ended with them in chains, all hope was lost. They emerged onto a wooded trail. Leaves glistened with dew. The first hints of dawn tinted the sky a deep navy. Manny half-carried Monique, Travis trailing behind, glancing nervously over his shoulder. They trudged for nearly an hour, stumbling on tree roots, sliding down muddy slopes. Finally, an old shack came into view, a single light burning in the window. Doc Latham turned out to be an aging white man with a scraggly beard and wild hair, who answered the door holding a shotgun. "Who the... Manny? Hell's bells, man. You bring trouble to my doorstep?" Doc's eyes flicked to Monique's leg, the blood soaking her pant. "Ah, Christ. Fine, bring her in." Inside was a cluttered single-room dwelling. Stacks of medical books, jars of mysterious liquids, a battered exam table that might have been stolen from a hospital decades ago. Doc cleared the table, gesturing for Manny to lay Monique down. She hissed at the agony of being touched. Doc rummaged for supplies, muttering the entire time. "I knew it. I said it. That sheriff's no good. Everyone calls me paranoid. Now look." He poured disinfectant over the wound. Monique clenched her teeth, tears escaping. Travis hovered, wringing his hands. Manny paced like a caged tiger, phone pressed to his ear, trying to contact some of his contacts about the footage. After what felt like an eternity of searing pain, Doc Latham removed the bullet fragments, stitched the torn flesh, and wrapped Monique's thigh tightly. He also cleaned and bandaged the new graze on her ribs. She almost passed out from the pain but stayed conscious, fear of being caught fueling her survival instinct. Finally, Doc handed her a bottle of antibiotics. "Take these. You rest or you'll tear those stitches. Then you'll bleed out. And I don't do funerals." Monique managed a grateful nod. Manny explained the entire story: trafficking, the sheriff, the corrupt deputies, the footage. Doc listened, grim-faced. "Sounds like the devil's got free reign over Granton, but maybe not for much longer if you got real proof." Travis tapped the laptop. "I'm working on sending it, but signal is near dead here." He eyed Doc. "You got any better internet?" Doc snorted. "Son, do I look like I pay for broadband?" "There's a library in the next town. They got free Wi-Fi, but it's a day's travel on foot, given all the roadblocks. You try driving, they'll spot you." Manny rubbed his chin. "We go at night, or we risk a disguise. We can't stay here too long. They'll track my phone eventually." Monique forced herself upright, ignoring the stabbing ache. "We have to get that footage out. That's our only hope." She paused, remembering her phone call to Rebecca. Could her friend help? She checked the phone Manny had. No missed calls from Rebecca. She stifled her disappointment. They took turns resting. Manny and Travis catnapped while Monique stared at the shack's ceiling, mind racing. She replayed that moment on the rooftop when she first recorded the deal. She thought of the terror in the teenage boy's eyes, thought of Ellis's sneer, the moral weight pressed so heavily on her chest it felt hard to breathe. She reminded herself of a quote she'd clung to during combat tours. "Courage is fear that has said its prayers." She might be terrified, but she was also determined. By late afternoon, Manny rummaged for disguises. Baggy clothes, hats, tinted sunglasses. Doc Latham donated an ancient wheelchair. "Tell the cops she's your invalid cousin," he suggested sarcastically. "Maybe they'll buy it." They rolled Monique out, wincing each time the battered wheelchair bumped. Travis carried the laptop in a backpack, Manny pushed the chair, and they made a winding path through old back roads, careful to avoid the main highways. They nearly got caught once. A lone deputy in a cruiser spotted them from a distance. Monique slumped forward, feigning unconsciousness while Manny flagged the officer down, playing the role of a desperate nephew. "Sir, we need a hospital," Manny said, voice trembling. The deputy eyed them suspiciously, but Manny's performance was convincing enough that he seemed to lose interest. "Hospital's that way," the deputy muttered, pointing, then sped off. Manny exhaled in relief once the cruiser disappeared around the bend. At dusk, they arrived in the next town over. It felt like another world. People strolling sidewalks, unharassed by cops. Manny pushed Monique into the library, and Travis rushed to find an open computer station. The librarian gave them a once-over but said nothing. Travis connected, rummaging for the video. Monique's heart thundered. This was it. Suddenly Manny's phone buzzed. He answered, face paling. "Oh no," he whispered. "They found Doc Latham's place. He's on the run. They've labeled him an accessory. They might track us here too." Time was short. Travis typed furiously. He found an independent media outlet's secure drop. He attached the file, wrote a short explanation. The progress bar inched forward. 20%, 40%, 60%. Monique's palms sweated. If it got to 100%, the world would see the horrifying truth. Manny kept watch. One or two patrons glanced over curiously, but no one raised an alarm. Finally, the upload hit 100%. Travis exhaled so hard it was nearly a sob. "Done," he whispered. Manny clapped a hand on Travis's shoulder. Monique felt tears threatening. If this worked, Rhodes would be done. She shot Manny a trembling smile. They rushed out, ditching the wheelchair behind. Monique limped, leaning on Manny. Travis said he had a contact at a local station that might want a live interview. The trio hailed an old taxi outside the library. The driver, a middle-aged woman chewing gum, asked, "Where to?" Manny paused. "We need a motel near Bell Avenue." The woman shrugged, pulling out onto the road. En route, the taxi radio crackled with a news bulletin. "Breaking development in Granton County. Anonymous footage has surfaced, allegedly showing local law enforcement involved in human trafficking. State authorities are investigating." They arrived at the motel. The moment they stepped out, Manny's phone buzzed again. He answered. Silence, then a trembling "okay." He hung up, turning to Monique and Travis. "That was some official from the governor's office. They want to talk to us about the video. They're sending state troopers to protect us." Monique sank onto a bench, tears slipping down her cheeks. Relief, exhaustion, hope. Was the nightmare finally ending? "We did it," Travis said, voice shaky. Manny nodded, but a shadow of dread still hovered in Monique's mind. Rhodes wouldn't go down quietly. He'd burn the whole county first if he could. They took rooms in the motel, planning to rest until the troopers arrived. Manny offered to get food from a nearby diner. Travis sat in front of the TV, flipping news channels, half expecting immediate coverage. Monique retreated to the bathroom with first aid supplies, peeled back the bandage on her leg. The stitches were inflamed, but not ruptured. She swallowed more painkillers, heart pounding. She remembered another quote that had guided her once. "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." She had to stay sharp. Night fell. Manny still hadn't returned. Travis grew antsy. The phone rang at 9 p.m. Monique answered with a cautious, "Hello." A rough male voice she recognized all too well sneered on the other end. "You think you've won?" It was Sheriff Rhodes. Her blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" He chuckled. "You're in the Oakside Motel, room 209, right? Manny's with us, and if you don't cooperate, he's dead." She realized Manny must have been ambushed at the diner. Her throat tightened with rage. "You can't keep covering this up," she spat. "The truth is out." Rhodes barked a laugh. "Truth? People see what we want them to see. You're cornered, soldier. Surrender yourself at the old mill on Route 7, or Manny dies. I'll text you the time. Show up alone, or he dies anyway." He hung up. Monique stared at the phone, trembling. Travis stood, eyes wide. "No, we can't. That's a trap." She swallowed, nodding. "I know, but Manny is one of us. I won't abandon him." Her voice quaked with a fierce resolve. She dialed the supposed number from the governor's office. No answer. She tried again, cursing under her breath. No response. Travis repeated, "Trap, trap, trap. We should call the state troopers or the FBI. We can't handle this alone." She met his gaze. We don't have time to wait. Manny was willing to risk his life, so will I. She hefted the old Glock she'd tucked in her bag, then paused. You don't have to come. Travis hesitated, fear warring with conscience. Damn it, he breathed. Fine. We'll go, but we're not going in blind. Let's outflank them somehow. We can approach from the hills behind the mill, right? She nodded. Yes, and maybe you set up a vantage point with the camera rolling. If I can get Manny free, we might have one more chance to show the world Rhodes's final stand. An hour later, they parked off a dirt road near the defunct mill, an eerie place with rotted timber structures and rusted machinery half buried in tall weeds. The night sky was thick with clouds, no moon to guide them. They advanced quietly, staying low. Travis, sweating profusely, muttered, I see a line of vehicles near that big loading dock. Monique's heart lurched. She spotted silhouettes, maybe half a dozen men. Flashlights danced among them. She glimpsed Manny, tied to a support post, his head slumped. A single overhead light cast him in stark relief against the gloom. She turned to Travis. Stay back with the camera. If it goes south, get evidence and run. Travis nodded, eyes full of dread. As she crept closer, her leg throbbed fiercely, each step an agony, but her military instincts kicked in, focusing her mind. She circled around, slipping behind a collapsed wall. She recognized a few of the men. Remington, Ellis with his arm in a sling, and 3 other deputies. Then she saw him, Sheriff Rhodes. Tall, broad, hair slicked back, a man who radiated cocky authority. He stared at Manny's limp form with disgust. You helped that traitor, Manny. I ought to end you now. But let's see if your friend shows first. Monique clenched her jaw. She still had the shotgun from the motel stashed in the trunk, but it was too unwieldy in her current state. She had the Glock plus a single flashbang left over from her army days, a piece of contraband she'd never turned in. She fished it out, sweat soaking her brow. Maybe that could create enough confusion, but Manny was too close to them. She had to be precise. Before she could act, Travis emerged from the darkness, hands raised. Monique's heart seized. No, she whispered. He was improvising, maybe sacrificing himself to distract them. Rhodes aimed a rifle. Who are you? Travis stammered. I'm the one who recorded your crimes. I came alone. Let Manny go. Rhodes smirked. Is that right? And the soldier, hiding somewhere? Travis shook his head, face pale. She's not here. She left me. Please, let Manny go. I'll give you the footage. He held up a flash drive. Monique realized he must have copied it from the laptop. Good thinking, but it put him in deadly danger. Rhodes gestured for Remington to frisk Travis. The sergeant patted him down, sneering as he found the flash drive. Boss, we got it. Rhodes took it, held it up to the light. So this is the cause of all my headaches, huh? He pocketed it with a grim grin, stepping toward Manny. You want me to let him go? All right, sure. Then he slammed the butt of his rifle into Manny's side. Manny groaned in agony, slumping further. Oops, Rhodes said with mock regret. I guess he's too weak to walk. Monique seethed, her hands shaking on the flashbang. She didn't see an easy shot. If she tossed it, she might stun Manny too. But time was running out. Manny wouldn't survive a savage beating. She steeled herself, pulled the pin, counted 3. Then she lobbed the flashbang, aiming for a spot just behind Rhodes. It hit the ground with a metallic clink. Boom! An ear-splitting crack of light and sound. The men cursed, staggering, eyes blinded. Manny too cried out, but the effect was slightly muted from his angle behind the post. Monique rushed in, Glock raised. She aimed at Remington's leg, fired once. He dropped, screaming. She whirled on Ellis, who fumbled for his weapon, but she kicked it aside. Her injured leg almost buckled. Ellis tried to tackle her. She squeezed the trigger, catching him in the shoulder again. He howled. Another deputy fired wildly in the confusion, bullets zipping overhead. Uzian roared, flailing, rifle dropping from numb fingers, his eyes watering from the flash. Monique hammered him in the jaw with the Glock. He stumbled, then swung a wild punch that clipped her temple. She fell to one knee, vision flickering. He lunged, grabbing her by the collar. "You meddling," he hissed. She jammed the Glock into his gut. "Let Manny go." She pulled the trigger, but it clicked empty. She was out of bullets. Rhodes seized the moment, backhanding her so hard she tasted blood. Travis, half blind, tried to free Manny from the rope. Another deputy recovered enough to aim at Travis, but Manny kicked out feebly, tripping the man. The shot went wide. Monique grappled with Rhodes, each trying to gain leverage. He was bigger, heavier. He pinned her arms, driving her wounded thigh into a piece of broken timber. She screamed in agony, tears streaming down her face. The raw ferocity in Rhodes's eyes told her he'd kill her right now, with his bare hands if he had to. "Soldier or not," Rhodes snarled. "This is my county, my rules." He tightened his grip around her neck. Spots swam in her vision. She groped blindly, found a shard of metal rebar on the ground. She brought it up with her last ounce of strength, slashing across his forearm. He yelped, reflexively letting go. She gasped a breath, then shoved him off. Rolling free, she rummaged for a spare magazine in her pocket, fumbling it into the Glock. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. Rhodes lunged again. She squeezed the trigger, lodging a round in his chest. He stumbled back, shock contorting his features. Another shot to his shoulder spun him around. He collapsed, groaning, blood oozing onto the dirt. Monique rose unsteadily, teeth gritted. Her entire body felt like it was on fire. She hobbled to Manny, helped Travis untie him. Manny crumpled into her arms, battered but alive. Deputies moaned on the ground. Ellis cursed, pressing a hand to his wound. Remington lay in a pool of blood, whimpering. Rhodes stared at Monique with hate-filled eyes. You ruin everything," he rasped. "We had an empire." Monique spat blood. "It was never yours to keep." Then, in the distance, she heard sirens. Real sirens. Travis's phone buzzed. He answered, still panting. "Hello?" Yes, we're at the mill. Hurry!" He turned to Monique, eyes wide with relief. "They're state troopers. Someone in the governor's office saw the footage and dispatched them." Light flooded the clearing as half a dozen state trooper vehicles screeched to a halt. Armed officers spilled out, commanding everyone to drop their weapons. Monique raised her hands, letting the Glock fall. The troopers quickly took in the scene. Rhodes's men wounded, Manny battered, Travis trembling, Monique's injuries. One trooper recognized Rhodes lying there, shot. "Sheriff," he said, voice thick with confusion, but then someone else spotted Manny's rope, the battered posts, the brandished rifles. Another trooper stepped forward, barking for paramedics. Chaos reigned for several minutes as the troopers secured the area. Monique nearly fainted from blood loss. Manny clutched her arm, tears in his eyes. "We did it," he whispered. "We survived." She woke up in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm, bright morning light streaming through the window. Travis dozed in a chair nearby, bandages on his head. Manny was nowhere in sight, but a nurse told her he was stable, just in another room. She exhaled, relief washing over her. She'd half expected to open her eyes in a jail cell. A state investigator arrived that afternoon, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit. She questioned Monique for hours, about the video, about the break-in at the station, the confrontation at the mill. Monique told the truth, leaving out only minor details about her most illegal infiltration tactics. The investigator listened in silence, occasionally nodding or scribbling notes. "In the end," she said, "your footage is being validated by several agencies. Rhodes is in custody, badly wounded. Most of his top deputies have also been arrested, including Ellis and Remington. The scale of corruption is staggering. The governor's declaring an emergency in Granton County to restore order. National media is all over this." Monique felt tears again. "What about the victims?" she asked. "The ones they sold, can we get them back?" The investigator's expression softened. "Some of them, hopefully. We're coordinating with multiple states. This is a big operation. But your courage exposed it all. You might have saved countless lives." Days turned into weeks. The country reeled from the scandal. Investigations revealed bodies in unmarked graves, money laundering, ties to powerful figures beyond just the senator. Public outrage exploded. The FBI, Department of Justice, and even the National Guard flooded Granton. Rhodes's empire collapsed. Survivors stepped forward with harrowing testimonies of forced labor, trafficking, and brutality. Liz emerged from hiding to testify. Manny gave interviews, telling the world how Monique had risked her life for them all. Aunt Teresa returned too, hugging Monique so tightly it hurt. "I'm proud of you, baby girl," she said, crying against Monique's hospital gown. "You didn't just talk about justice, you fought for it." The local reporters who once parroted Rhodes's propaganda now sang Monique's praises. She hated the spotlight, but she endured the interviews for the sake of shining a light on the horrors that had plagued her aunt's town. Travis's footage circulated everywhere. The exchange behind the station, the final confrontation at the mill, caught on partial phone recordings. People demanded answers. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Some were indicted after investigators uncovered bribe records. Rhodes survived his gunshot wounds, but faced a mountain of charges: kidnapping, trafficking, attempted murder, conspiracy, and more. He'd never see the outside world as a free man again. The state troopers who found him said he spat vile slurs at them, still blaming outsiders for meddling in his county. The world saw him for the monster he was. Monique had multiple surgeries for her leg. The bullet shattered bone. She'd probably always have a limp. But that was a small price, she thought, compared to the hundreds of people who got a chance at freedom because the ring was smashed. She became somewhat of a folk hero, though she dismissed it. "I only did what was right," she told a CNN host. "I'd do it again if I had to, though I pray no one else will have to go through it." Manny eventually reunited with his wife and daughter. He cried on national television, hugging them close. Liz found her son safe and promised to testify against Rhodes's men. Aunt Teresa became a local figure for activism, pushing for better oversight of law enforcement. Travis resumed his journalism career, receiving an award for his investigative courage. One sunny afternoon, after her final hospital checkup, Monique walked with a cane to the front steps of the new Granton County Courthouse. A group of onlookers applauded politely. A reporter thrust a microphone. "What's next for you?" Monique gazed at the cleaned-up street, remembering the horrors. "Healing," she said simply. "For me, for Granton, for everyone who survived. We can't forget what happened. We have to rebuild." She turned to Manny, who stood at her side. He offered a faint smile. "You never gave up on this place," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Couldn't. Duty doesn't end just because you take off the uniform." In the aftermath, people debated the moral lines Monique crossed: trespassing, assault, minor property destruction. Some argued she was a vigilante. Others praised her for stepping in where the system had failed. But the consensus was that her actions had exposed a vile enterprise that thrived on fear. The debate raged on: talk shows, social media, barbershops, and living rooms across America. Many asked, could it happen in our town? That question spurred deeper looks at law enforcement accountability nationwide. Monique's scars, physical and emotional, lingered. Nightmares sometimes woke her, drenched in sweat, recalling the flashbang at the mill or the life-or-death brawl with Rhodes. But she also found a measure of peace in the knowledge that the cycle of terror in Granton had been broken. She sometimes visited the new sheriff, an honest man appointed by the state, to consult on reforms. They didn't always agree, but they shared a vision of preventing monsters like Rhodes from rising again. Aunt Teresa insisted on throwing a celebratory picnic once Monique could walk without crutches. Neighbors brought dishes, kids played in the yard, Manny grilled hamburgers, occasionally rubbing the scar on his forehead. Liz arrived with her son, both smiling timidly, but relieved to breathe free air. Travis fussed with a camera, capturing the moment. Monique sat under a big oak, soaking in the warmth of community that had once seemed crushed by fear. She offered a silent prayer of thanks for the second chance. The news eventually moved on to other stories, as it always does, but in Granton County, the memory lingered: how an ex-Army woman, black, fierce, and unwilling to be bullied, sparked a revolution with a single camera and unstoppable courage. For the citizens who had lived under Rhodes's tyranny, it became a legend told on front porches. You hear about that soldier lady who brought the sheriff down? She taught him not to mess with the wrong warrior. And in that humble county, seeds of true justice were planted. Because once a community realizes it can fight back, that it can speak up, no tyrant can hold it in terror for long. There is always a cost to victory. Monique's limp, the scars on Manny's soul, the heartbreak etched into those who lost loved ones. But the price of inaction would have been higher. As for Monique, she often recalled a line she'd once heard from a fellow soldier. No one fights alone, even if it feels that way sometimes. Indeed, she never truly fought alone. Aunt Teresa, Manny, Liz, Travis, the honest troopers, the dauntless victims who spoke out, they all joined the battle in their own ways. That's what brought Rhodes down, standing together. And if there's one profound lesson she wanted the world to carry, it was this: evil flourishes in silence. The moment one person stands up, others find the courage to stand too. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." Monique believed in that wholeheartedly. She'd bled for it, in fact, but she'd do it again if it meant saving even one life from the darkness of tyranny. The hush of the courthouse corridor, the hush of the new sheriff's office, the hush of souls finally set free, those silences spoke volumes. They said sometimes you have to break the law to uphold a higher law. They said that one bullet, one camera lens, one phone call, or one small act of rebellion could shake an entire regime. Months after her final discharge from the hospital, Monique sat on Aunt Teresa's porch, gazing at a sunset that painted the sky in peaches and reds. Manny, Travis, and Liz joined her, talking about the future. She smiled softly, leaning her cane against the railing. "We saw the worst, and we overcame it," she said. "That means there's hope for everyone." Travis rubbed the back of his neck. "So what's next for you, personally?" She thought for a moment, the breeze brushing her cheek. "Maybe I'll open a community center. A place for veterans, abused folks, people who need healing. We'll see." She looked out at the horizon, at the wide land of a country still wrestling with its own ghosts of prejudice and corruption. "One step at a time, but we keep moving forward." Manny exhaled, nodding. "I think that's the best we can do." They sat in companionable silence, the cicadas starting their dusk chorus. In that moment, Monique felt a wave of calm she hadn't known in years. She might still carry wounds from war, both overseas and here in the rural American battlefield of corruption, but she also carried an unbreakable will and a heart that refused to bow to injustice. And sometimes, that was enough to tip the scales toward justice. Our story reminds us that justice, while precious, doesn't come cheap. Here are a few lessons worth holding close. We learn that silence can be the greatest ally of evil. When entire communities resign themselves to oppression, corruption festers. Monique's choice to stand up, even when it meant risking everything, shows how one voice can shatter the hush that tyranny depends on. We see that power corrupts when unchecked. Sheriff Rhodes built a fortress of fear precisely because no higher authority intervened, until someone forced the truth into the open. Transparency, accountability, and the courage to question authority are vital to prevent such horrors. We grasp that every victory against injustice carries a price: physical wounds, shattered psyches, or lost livelihoods. But that sacrifice can spark a ripple effect of hope. Manny, Liz, Travis, Aunt Teresa, all found new strength because Monique lit the way. Finally, we discover the truth in a saying popular among those aged 25 to 45 who've been through life's storms. You don't need a cape to be someone's hero. Monique wasn't perfect, she wasn't unstoppable, but her grit, sense of honor, and refusal to remain silent became the shield her neighbors needed. So as you close this tale, remember that no matter how deep corruption's roots go, there is always a path to uproot it. It may be hidden in darkness, guarded by guns, but a determined heart and a fearless mind can pry it open. Because in the end, the line between a vicious regime and justice can be as thin as the lens of a camera, as small as the bullet in your sidearm, or as fragile as the single rope you manage to break. But that line exists, waiting for someone to dare cross it for the greater good. If you've been moved by Monique's story, pass it on. Let others know that everyday warriors walk among us. Veterans, neighbors, friends, ready to stand against oppression. We all have a role in writing the next chapter of this nation's pursuit of liberty and justice for all. Sometimes all it takes is one act of bravery to remind the world that no darkness can extinguish the light of a resolute soul.